whenever you talk about prisons, you've got to talk about them in the context of the whole criminal justice spectrum. You have a lot of other problems, diversity in sentencing practices. I see people come down here for 5 years for shoplifting. And I see someone else who not only took the till, he took the vault. And he doesn't serve a day, he gets a suspended sentence. We recently did a study in our research section on murderers in Texas, and there are approximately 1,600 at the moment serving time in Texas prisons. And we excluded those under the death sentence, and their sentences run all the way from 2 years to life. And occasionally I read in the paper where someone's convicted of murder with malice receives a suspended sentence.
Your office has a reputation for asking for lengthy prison sentences, 1,000-year sentences, and even longer in some cases. In April, a Dallas grand jury awarded what has been called the longest sentence in Texas history, 2,500 years for robbery and murder. What is the rationale, Mr. Wade, in asking for these lengthy prison sentences?
Well, number one, the law provides for any term of years for certain crimes. I think in reference to fighting crime, probably the biggest deterrence to crime is the swiftness and sureness of punishment. But I think the severity of it enters into it, has a place in it. I don't actually know, as you're undoubtedly aware, the parole laws provide that a person, after he gets credit for a third of his sentence or 20 years, is eligible for parole. On paper, it may not sound to mean anything, but the parole board in Austin that handles these, they, even according to the chairman who was recently here, they consider this as the intent of the jury that this man should not make an early parole.
Generally, I'd like to make the observation that I think these long sentences are more or less a public expurgation, maybe the public's cleansing itself in giving this type of sentence. Actually, severity of punishment is not a deterrent to crime. The sureness of punishment is, and the swiftness is, but the severity, I think, is futile. And I think European examples are a case in point. It's difficult in Western Europe to find sentences exceeding 6 years, but the swiftness and the sureness of the penalty is greater there than it is here.
You can understand the frustration of a man who knows that regardless of what he does to rehabilitate himself, how well he conducts himself in the penitentiary, there's absolutely no possible hope for him to get out, because the Board of Pardons and Paroles probably will look at the 1,000 years and will continue to turn his parole down.
What good it does, the only thing I can tell you is that in January of 1970, we had 8 robbery murders in Dallas, where they robbed someone and killed the victim. 5 of them were women, I might say. We started a policy at that time of denying bail to hijackers, the robbers, or at least asking the judges not to sign bail, and giving precedence to those trials and asking for death penalties, and also heavy sentences, if not death penalties. We've got the first one of these long sentences, March of '70, which is 1,000 years, I think. We had 6 death penalties last year. We have 8 so far this year. But to go on with my story, during the next 11 months of, or next 10 months of 1970, we had 1 robbery murder in Dallas County. You can't say what caused it, but I think undoubtedly your heavy sentences and your death penalties.
My concern about it is that there may be a tendency among prosecutors to compete with each other to see which one can persuade their juries to give the highest sentence. And then you have competition between counties sometimes. And of course, jurors who may be frustrated at the increase in crime may certainly be tempted to go along with this. That's certainly a danger. Other dangers, of course, may be that you may have prosecutors who may be urging in voir dire examination or jury argument these high penalties merely for the publicity that they might get out of it.
So you see that that does have a deterrent effect then on the
I think it's a contributing factor. I think our biggest weakness is, like I say, the swiftness and sureness, I think, is more important. The problem is that you can't get swiftness and sureness here. You have a lot of handicaps. One, we run 6 months behind on trials. Two, cases stay on appeal anywhere from 2 to 7 or 8 years now, where there's no finality of a judgment. As the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court says, they have to, somewhere you got to say, this is it, your appeals.
But our best policy for keeping crime down, especially among the repeaters, is to attempt to rehabilitate these individuals rather than take the attitude of throw them in the jail, lock the door, and forget about them, because we don't forget about them.